Who's afraid of the Old Testament? Most of us, probably. The clue is in the title. It's old, and the societies it reveals are so very unlike our own. Many of the practices and institutions described seem wholly alien to us. We view it through our modern lenses, often with something approaching horror. Even the way it is written is vastly different from today's literature, and as it predates the coming of Jesus, we're not quite sure how to engage with it. But this is Jesus the Jews' own formative backstory. It's the history of a people who'd spent centuries building a somewhat erratic relationship with an unseen God. Theirs was quite different from many neighbouring civilizations with which it nevertheless had to deal. Today's extract from the long story of Abraham, God's friend, is pretty shocking to present sensibilities. Why? Because that ancient evil, slavery, underpins the narrative, and gender inequality, and abuse. Of course, those still go on nowadays, but are generally considered unacceptable. The key figure in today's snapshot would also have been largely invisible at the time. Although Hagar is delicately referred to as a servant in most translations, what happens to her does imply that she is in fact enslaved, less than a person to many minds, but useful for one purpose especially, even though that did not last. I don't remember really any other life. I suppose I was very small when I lost my family. Ever since I could walk and carry things, I have worked, been a utensil for richer folks, convenient for dirty, repetitive or laborious jobs. My name supposedly means a refugee, which tells you something. It's less of a name, more a description for the inventory. My mistress and her husband were down in Egypt, the only place I can call home, when they acquired me. Elderly couple, him especially. Well-to-do, plenty of possessions, including livestock of all kinds, if you get my drift. The trouble really started a good few years after we had settled in Canaan. They are religious. Oh no, not like the gods of Egypt, jackal or crocodile-headed, beetle or sandisk, just the one God, unseen, not even a statue. Mr. and Mrs. Abraham were short of one thing, a son and heir, all those goods and chattels, but no kin to inherit. Worse still, seems their God had promised them many descendants, and her ladyship, now far too old. I cannot say when first I caught her eye. I don't think it was his idea. But suddenly I'm getting better food, lighter duties, even better clothes. Life became easier. Call me naive, but it never crossed my mind. I wasn't asked, of course, just told. Choice? Do slaves have feelings? It was a duty, that's all, I did as I was told, with gritted teeth, yes. But I'm young and healthy, not like Madam, with her insincere, encouraging smiles, until he hit the jackpot. Face like a camel sucking a lemon then. Yes, I know. I shudder to remember how I behaved. But it was the first time I had something they did not. I, who did not even own what I stood up in. I had nothing, belonged nowhere. But now, my blessed fruit gave me value. Legally, the child would be theirs. Hers, however I felt about it. For just a while, I'd had status, something I'd never ever had in my life. I did not mean to laugh at her. I was just so happy. She couldn't help it. So much pressure and such barely disguised shame. But then, after the visitors came that day, she, impossible, is expecting a happy event too. And a few nervous months later, all my hopes are dashed, and little laughing boy pushed Abe's firstborn son aside. Sarah is queen again. I've outlived my usefulness, and she had only to crook her little finger after Isaac's weaning party, no less. And Abe, he pecks us off to die, like we are nothing, disposable, to cover her embarrassment and jealousy, his own weakness and lack of faith. We are both rejected, though parting with his boy broke the old man's heart. We'd never have made it. The bread and water rations were soon gone, but when I had no tears left, I shoved my little man into what shade I could find, so I would not see him die. Suppose I was delirious because a voice in my head told me I must get up. Ishmael was still Abraham's son and would begin a great nation too. I had run away once before, but someone told me to go back to them. I must call him Ishmael. God listens. He was still listening. My head was reeling, but through the heat haze I spotted a well. Water, life, that God of his. Our lives mattered, after all, a refugee, an exploited and rejected handmaid, and her unruly mistake of a son. And just because of who's the daddy. I am not so sure. An uncomfortable episode, especially right now. But Abraham's eldest son, Ishmael, did father an influential dynasty and became revered as a key ancestor of the Ishmaelite Arabian people, forerunners of Islam. And his name, which means God listens, seems especially telling and poignant. Instead of becoming anonymous collateral damage, a mere footnote in Abraham's story, the boy and his mother were valued and later honoured. Hagar, or Hajra, would not be the last powerless handmaid to catch God's attention. nor indeed the last whose story would challenge the mighty and proud and bring to light the blind spots of the righteous with lasting effect.